The Tenements, Life on 12 cents a day. Back during the 1880s, a journalist named Helen Campbell made a decision that would shape everything that followed. She chose to go undercover, embedding herself in Manhattan's crowded tenement districts. What she discovered there was both meticulously documented and deeply human. Women, struggling, working, surviving women, existed on exactly 12 cents per day. This wasn't a choice they'd made about budgeting or frugality. This was simply all the money they possessed. And from this meager allowance, they had to construct something resembling a life. Here's what actual survival looked like for the working poor living in New York City during that era. If stories like this one help you find your way to sleep, perhaps you might consider subscribing. Feel free to drop a comment wherever you're listening from and tell me what time it currently is where you are. I'm perpetually curious about who's out there in the darkness with me, listening along. So go ahead and get comfortable. Adjust those covers. You're warm right now, aren't you? You feel safe. Your stomach probably isn't rumbling with hunger. These are things worth keeping in mind as we journey back to a period when none of these certainties existed. The smell comes first. When you first open your eyes in a tenement on the Lower East Side, perhaps on Orchard Street, or somewhere even more degraded, the atmosphere assaults your senses before anything else registers. The year is 1886, and the first sensation your nostrils pick up is cabbage boiling in a neighboring apartment. Then comes the acrid smell of coal dust. Underneath everything, there's something else, something sharper, more persistent, something your body has grown accustomed to noticing, but that never truly disappears. It's the odor emanating from the shared privy in the courtyard below. 20 families depend on that single facility. During summer months, the stench becomes nearly unbearable. Even through the winter, when temperatures drop and the smell should diminish, it somehow finds its way up through the floorboards. Settling into every corner of your living space, your bedroom, if you can even call it that, exists in almost total darkness, not merely dim or shadowed, but genuinely dark. The room where you sleep with another person has no window of its own. Instead, walls surround you on all sides, creating a box perhaps 8 feet by 8 feet, with a ceiling so low that you could brush it with your fingertips without fully extending your arm. Inside this cramped space sits a bed that you share with your sister, or perhaps your mother, or perhaps both simultaneously. Those sheets were once white, but time and use have transformed them into something resembling the color of aged tea. Your eyes adjust only gradually to this absence of light. The sole source of illumination filtering into the bedroom comes from the front room, where a small window opens directly onto an air shaft. On fortunate days, this opening admits a pale grayish light. On less fortunate days, it channels in the odors emanating from the adjacent building across the shaft. Sometimes it manages both simultaneously. The body's exhaustion. You gradually sit upright, and pain immediately announces itself throughout your back. It's constant now, this ache that never truly goes away. Yesterday, you labored for 14 hours at the sewing machine. Another 14-hour stretch awaits you today. The machine operates on a treadle mechanism, where your legs generate the power while your hands shepherd the fabric beneath the needle. By the time your shift concludes, your entire physical form feels detached from you, as though it belongs to someone else entirely, someone elderly. someone who made profoundly regrettable choices somewhere along the way. But here's the reality of existing in poverty during the 1880s in New York City. You don't have the luxury of indulging self-pity for extended periods. The opportunity simply doesn't exist. Minutes are already slipping away. Every moment you remain lying down represents a moment you're not generating income. So your body moves. The wooden floorboards groan beneath your weight. They consistently do. This structure was hastily erected and constructed with cheap materials some 20 years earlier, and the deterioration shows clearly. Walls are thin enough that you can distinguish your neighbor's arguments from your own room. The stairwell sags noticeably in the middle, worn down by thousands of footsteps over years of daily use. Nothing in this space was built with durability in mind. The people inhabiting it, they weren't designed to last forever either, if you're being completely honest about it. The front room, you make your way to the main living area, where essentially everything in your life occurs. Cooking takes place here. Eating happens here. You work here. You live here. For your entire family, this space encompasses approximately 300 square feet. An inexpensive coal stove occupies one wall. A table sits nearby, surrounded by chairs. The window faces the air shaft. Some families have circumstances even more challenging than yours. Rooms positioned along the street command premium prices. You occupy the rear section, where genuine light never quite penetrates and air movement is virtually non-existent. On the table, breakfast waits for you. This is where we need to have a serious discussion about money and what it actually means. You possess, if fortune smiles on you, approximately 12 cents to allocate toward food today. That amount belongs to you alone. If other household members exist, they each receive their own 12 cents. But at this moment, let's concentrate on yours. 12 cents represents the sum required to remain alive for the next 24 hours. In 1886, 12 cents actually hold genuine purchasing power. You can acquire actual items with this amount. But here's what nobody clarifies when you're living comfortably in the future, wrapped in blankets in your warm sleeping space with your stomach full. The mathematics is brutal. The brutal arithmetic. A loaf of bread goes for 5 cents. Quality rye bread, the type that genuinely fills you and sustains you over time. The German bakers operating on the east side produce it with particular skill, dense and dark, exactly what's needed. The women in these neighborhoods know precisely which bakeries offer the most substantial loaves for their nickel. There's a reason a 5-year-old child named Bridget has memorized the location of every bakery within walking distance of her building. Her entire role in the household consists of discovering the best value in bread. She's 5 years old, yet she's already mastered the economics of survival through poverty. So 5 cents goes toward bread. You now have 7 cents remaining. Tea isn't a luxury item, it's genuinely essential. The water from the neighborhood pumps is questionable at absolute best. These pumps operate mere feet away from the outdoor privies, and whatever soil exists between them hardly functions as a sophisticated water filtration mechanism. Sickness spreads. People expire. But when you boil water for tea, you kill whatever harmful organisms might be lurking beneath the surface. The caffeine provides sufficient energy to sustain you through another 14-hour shift. Think of tea as medicine that happens to taste like a beverage. A month's supply of tea costs roughly 30 cents. Calculate it as approximately 1 penny daily. give or take. 2 teaspoonfuls will cost you 1 cent. You're down to 6 cents remaining. Cheese, when available, runs approximately 10 cents per pound. If you're particularly careful, a pound extends across several days. Let's estimate you spend 2 cents on cheese today. 4 cents remain, possibly some liver sausage next. Running about 15 cents per pound, you might allocate 3 cents for a modest portion. Now you're down to a solitary cent. That final cent might flow toward milk, perhaps just a splash for your tea, or it might purchase a tiny quantity of butter that makes the bread slightly simpler to consume. Alternatively, it might not be spent at all, saved for tomorrow when you might require it more desperately. That constitutes your day. Rye bread, tea, perhaps some cheese, possibly a bit of meat if circumstances align favorably, maybe a splash of milk. Don't expect vegetables in any meaningful quantity. Fresh produce doesn't appear. Nothing that demands time or fuel for preparation exists in your diet. And regarding that fuel question, coal costs approximately $5 or $6 per ton when acquired in bulk wholesale quantities. But you're not a wholesale buyer. You purchase coal by the scuttle, a small metal container at a time. You don't own $5 waiting around, and you certainly lack any space to store a full ton of coal, even if you somehow possess the funds. So you pay 12 cents for a scuttle, which breaks down to roughly $12 per ton, double the wholesale price. This is what we call the poverty penalty. Having limited resources makes everything more expensive. You cannot purchase in substantial quantities because you lack the upfront capital. You cannot secure better pricing because you possess no leverage whatsoever. You cannot economize by spending money because you have no money to spend. When you're poor, everything costs more. The landlord understands this principle perfectly. The coal merchant grasps it completely. The grocer knows it intimately. Everyone who sells anything to the poor recognizes this dynamic, except for the comfortable people living uptown who author newspaper editorials suggesting that the poor simply need to manage their finances more effectively. The cooking dilemma. You cannot afford to prepare cooked meals. That's the harsh logic underlying everything. Dried beans cost nearly nothing per pound. They're nutritious, they're filling, they're incredibly inexpensive, but they need 3 hours of simmering, 3 hours of coal burning, 3 hours of fuel you cannot possibly afford. By the time you've transformed those cheap beans into something edible, the fuel has cost more than the food itself. This explains why everyone survives on bread and tea. Not because they lack knowledge, not because they're unaware of nutrition. Because bread requires no cooking. Tea demands only boiling water. Cold cuts need no heat whatsoever. The least expensive foods at the grocery store actually become the most expensive foods for people without resources, because the poor cannot afford the preparation. An older German woman residing in one of these buildings attempted to explain this dynamic to someone who visited. She'd trained as a culinary specialist during her younger years back in her homeland. She understood how to create soup from bones and scraps. For 7 cents worth of ingredients, she could feed herself for 2 full days. Yet she represented the exception. She possessed both knowledge and, more critically, time. Most people lacked either attribute. When visitors suggested she teach others, she articulated the fundamental challenge. She'd attempted instruction regularly. She'd distribute portions of her soup, and people would consume it and proclaim it wonderful. But they simply couldn't commit to such effort. Too much fuss. That particular word keeps appearing repeatedly in historical records from this era. Cooking is fuss. Paying attention to nutrition is fuss. Health is fuss. When your days consist of 14 hours of labor just to earn sufficient funds for rent and bread, everything beyond basic survival transforms into fuss, a luxury you cannot accommodate, including deliberation about whether you're gradually starving yourself. The widow's story. Campbell discovered one woman whose account penetrated through all the statistics. She'd emigrated to New York from Ireland while young, carrying no family, no connections, no protective safety net. Employment came as a seamstress fabricating shirts. The work seemed respectable initially. In 1880, she could generate $1.75 for a dozen shirts. That calculated to nearly 15 cents per individual shirt. Not impressive, yet survivable. You could maintain both body and soul functioning on those wages. By 1886, however, the rate had descended to 85 cents per dozen, approximately 7 cents per shirt. Less than 50% of what she'd earned merely 6 years prior. Identical work, identical hours, identical technical skill. The compensation had been cut in half. The sewing machine was promoted as a liberating invention, destined to simplify labor for workers, boost productivity, accelerate output. And technically, it accomplished all of these objectives. It also meant that more individuals could perform the work. More competition emerged. Wages fell inevitably. The machinery didn't emancipate the workers. It made them cheaper, interchangeable, disposable. This particular woman toiled 14-hour stretches, sometimes 18 during the season when demand peaked. Her fingers left bloodstains on the fabric. Her backbone had permanently curved forward from countless hours hunched above the machine. After completing her shifts, she might earn $1 on favorable days, considerably less on difficult ones. Not sufficient income for actual survival, merely enough to avoid immediate expiration. The journalist Campbell investigated the circumstances of women in the shirt-making trade. She discovered that the vast majority earned under $5 weekly for 70 to 80 hours of labor. This translated to approximately 7 cents per hour of their existence. This was what their time was valued at. 7 cents to purchase an hour of your life. The landlord sought his rent. The grocer demanded payment for previous week's provisions. The coal merchant required cash payment up front. By the end of calculations, there existed insufficient funds. There was never enough. The mathematics couldn't possibly function. The system wasn't designed to permit people like her to thrive. It was constructed specifically to extract their labor as inexpensively as possible, then discard them once they'd worn out their usefulness. The breaking point. What happened next, she recounted to Campbell, revealed the system's true cruelty. A factory foreman proposed increased wages if she'd meet with him after hours. She refused initially. She continued refusing. She persisted in her refusal until her financial situation made refusal impossible, until desperation overwhelmed her principles, until she found herself engaging in activities she'd sworn she'd never perform simply to generate the money necessary to continue existing. Let God Almighty judge who bears the most responsibility, she expressed to Campbell. I attempted legitimate work. Genuinely, I did. I persisted at it until my strength completely evaporated. That phrase, I tried it till I give out, surfaces repeatedly throughout Campbell's documentation. Women who attempted genuinely, women who labored, women who executed everything correctly, yet still ended up with nothing substantial. The system wasn't fundamentally broken. It operated exactly according to design. It simply wasn't designed to benefit them. You remain in the tenement. Sunlight begins filtering through the air shaft window, gray light, barely present, yet light nonetheless. Your younger sister stirs in the back room. She hasn't yet been ground down by machine work. Provide her several more years. The labor will inevitably discover her too. Everyone gravitates toward the machines eventually, or something even worse. You cut a slice of rye bread, dense and dark, just as you desired. The German bakeries execute this perfectly. You consume slowly, because that's the technique you've perfected. Make it last. Convince your stomach there's more coming. The tea is weak, possibly brewed yesterday, but it's warm. That registers as something positive. The notebook, sitting on the table beside your bread, rests a modest notebook. Your mother maintained it, or someone did before you. Every cent accounted for, every expense documented meticulously. Not because anyone supervises or inspects your accounting, but because this practice keeps you alive. You require knowing precisely where funds go. You need understanding exactly how close to the edge you exist. Last month brought earnings of $22.95. $10 disappeared to rent immediately. That left $12.95 for everything else. Food expenses, coal for the stove, lighting materials, soap, clothing, everything that sustains two people. $12.95 spread across 30 calendar days. Approximately 43 cents daily for two people, 21 cents each. Honestly, that represents superior circumstances compared to many others. You're managing relatively well. You have each other. The rent burden divides between two incomes. Alone, you'd be surrendering most of your paycheck simply to maintain a roof. The women living by themselves face the harshest circumstances: widows, orphans, women whose husbands succumbed to alcohol or dock accidents or simply vanished one day without explanation. They attempt survival on identical wages while covering identical rent as families. The mathematics cannot function. It simply cannot. Something must be sacrificed. Typically, it's food. Campbell interviewed a woman spending less than 50 cents weekly on food, 70 cents during fortunate weeks, primarily rye bread because it's cheaper and denser, tea because it fills and warms you, perhaps cheese if minimal extra funds appeared, maybe milk on Sundays as a rare indulgence. Meat? Nearly never. Vegetables? An impossibility she couldn't justify spending on. Her body revealed the consequences clearly: the pallor, the weakness, movement that mimicked someone decades older. She was 42. She resembled 60. The work and hunger had consumed her from within. The impossible choice. What alternative existed? Cease working and starve more rapidly? Beg on the streets? That's precisely how women ended up in circumstances they never intended. That's how they found themselves engaging in activities they'd never contemplated. The selection wasn't between comfort and discomfort. It existed between slow demise and rapid death, between retaining your dignity and staying physically alive. Most selected slow progression. Most continued working, kept consuming bread and tea, kept wearing themselves down incrementally because, at minimum, that way they could examine themselves in mirrors. At minimum, they could pretend they remained in command of something. The bread disappears now. Your tea cools in its cup. Beyond the window, the city awakens. Cartwheels grinding against cobblestones. Someone hollering in Italian. a child crying somewhere distant, work calls. 14 hours await you. 14 hours guiding fabric beneath a needle while your legs operate the treadle mechanism. You'll perhaps earn 85 cents, maybe $1, if the work stays consistent. Sufficient for doing this identically tomorrow. That's the rhythm existing here. Work, consume, sleep, work. Eat whatever your budget permits, which isn't substantial. Sleep when you manage to find rest time, which isn't lengthy. Always work, since the option is considerably worse. Yet here's something that might astonish you. Residents in these tenements laughed. They shared jokes. They experienced romantic connection, married, produced children, celebrated holidays, anticipated things, not despite the poverty, not in spite of it somehow, but alongside it, because human nature demonstrates remarkable stubbornness. You cannot completely extinguish the life force from people. It persists somehow, even in the darkest environments. The women Campbell interviewed weren't universally shattered and despondent. Certain ones harbored anger, some expressed humor. Particular ones possessed sharp intellects and strong perspectives about nearly everything, with zero patience for foolishness. Poverty didn't reduce them to something subhuman. It simply placed them in nearly unmanageable circumstances. The challenge to convention, when someone suggested a woman substitute beans instead of bread, she responded explosively. Beans? What available time do I have to contemplate beans? What funds allow me to acquire the coal necessary for cooking them? What you'd desire, what you'd choose if you positioned yourself at a machine 14 hours daily, would be tea. Strong tea to provide you backbone and endurance. Tea like lye to maintain you functioning when everything else has collapsed. That's poetry, whether she recognized it as such or not. The type of bitter, burning fuel that propels you forward when other things have failed, not actual nutrition, survival. There's genuinely a distinction between those two concepts. You consume your final cup of tea. You examine your notebook one additional time, though you've already memorized the figures. Then you proceed toward the entrance, descending the sagging staircase, navigating past odors you've educated yourself to disregard, stepping out into the gray morning light of 1886 Manhattan. The machine waits. The nearer the river, the nearer to hell. A carpenter proclaimed that phrase at one point, proceeding toward the Hudson with his equipment container, a substantial individual, apparently German. His smaller companion walked beside him, contributing his own curses and expressions of solidarity. They were discussing something different entirely, some grievance or another, yet those opening words embedded themselves. They transformed into a kind of rallying cry for the West Side districts where the absolutely destitute ultimately landed. See, Manhattan contained a mapped-out geography of suffering. The East Side possessed its tenements, certainly. We've just traversed one. Yet the West Side, particularly the sections closer to the river, represented something entirely different. That's where you ended up if you descended as far as circumstances permitted you to fall. The West Side realities. The docks existed there. The slaughterhouses, the gas manufacturing facilities pumping their noxious odors permanently into the atmosphere, streets that never quite dried out, buildings that appeared exhausted, listing slightly as though standing required unbearable effort. The people inhabiting these areas, most weren't born into such situations. That's the aspect that catches in your throat when you consider it carefully. They originated from elsewhere, from better circumstances. They harbored different aspirations once. Then circumstances shifted. A husband passed away. Employment opportunities vanished. Illness consumed savings like acid-destroying cloth. And they awakened one morning in a West Side tenement, puzzling over how they'd arrived at this destination. Let me present one particular narrative. A widow around 50 years old lived through this experience. Her specific name doesn't appear in historical documentation, only her circumstances. She'd previously inhabited Greenwich Village, that peculiar triangle of older New York where streets follow illogical patterns and buildings possess character. A respectable location, a respectable existence. The kind of life where you could host family relations without experiencing shame. That dimension mattered profoundly to her. You must comprehend just how significantly that registered. Respectability transcended mere vanity. It represented survival of a different category entirely. When people talked about you, when your circumstances became common knowledge, doors sealed shut. Opportunities evaporated. The distinction between poor yet honorable and thoroughly fallen remained razor thin. And once you crossed that dividing line, re-entry proved nearly impossible. So when her husband expired, she managed the way widows in her position typically did. She persisted. She remained in Greenwich Village as long as possible, expending her accumulated savings to preserve her image because surely circumstances would improve, surely a possibility would emerge. Surely this was a temporary condition. It wasn't. The funds completely depleted. At 50 years old, she discovered herself without any friend whose residence she could claim. She relocated to a West Side tenement far from any civilized areas, near the Hudson's western bank. An Irish neighborhood, ground floor of an enormous building containing strangers, 2 rooms, one barely sufficient for placing a bed inside. Whatever furniture she'd managed conserving from her earlier life, the life that seemed to belong to someone completely different now. Perhaps it would have been preferable to proceed to rural areas, she mentioned to the woman interviewing her subsequently. Yet, you must understand, rural existence wasn't my familiarity, and any work I could locate happened right here in the city. The work entailed sewing, children's garments, primarily skirts, the type of intricate handwork that demanded competence yet paid almost nothing. She possessed sewing ability. So did her daughter, whom she called Emmeline, Emmy for short. Together, initially, they achieved functional viability. Sometimes they generated $15 weekly. Genuinely respectable compensation for piecework during that era, $2 approximately per day, sufficient for constructing something more lasting, sufficient for possibly extracting themselves from the cavity they descended into. Yet there remained a debt. Her deceased husband's debt, small by some interpretations, but it existed nonetheless, and she couldn't permit it, standing against his reputation. The two of them had never owed anybody anything previously. That circumstance had comprised their collective pride, so she repaid it, every single cent. She erased his name from financial obligation before she could contemplate accumulating anything for her own security. The illness, then sickness, arrived. Rheumatic fever, the variety that settles into your joint structure and never truly departs. She recovered mostly, but her vigor never completely returned. Insufficient power remained. Simultaneously, prices continued descending. Rates for piecework kept declining. The identical work, that had produced $15 weekly started generating progressively less. By the moment she conversed with the interviewer, Emmy performed the overwhelming majority of earning, 12-hour stretches at the machine, 14-hour days more frequently. Yet the maximum she'd generated across more than a year and a half was 85 cents daily. That's roughly what Emmy's hourly labor was valued at, 6 cents. Two people managed to survive on that inadequate amount. I believe we couldn't sustain ourselves if I ever ventured outside, the mother acknowledged. But I haven't possessed shoes in 24 months. Consider that statement carefully for a moment. 2 complete years without shoes. Not because she didn't wish for them, because she couldn't justify the expenditure. Whenever funds approached sufficiency for purchasing shoes, something else demanded the money first: food requirements, rental payments, coal for heating. Emmy's footwear because Emmy required them. She had to venture out, had to travel to work, had to appear presentable. The mother could remain indoors. The mother could patch her deteriorating footwear with fragments salvaged from her late husband's coat, managing acceptably, except they never accumulated enough surplus for me to have shoes and Emmy simultaneously. She's the one who must go out. Here's where the notebook returns to importance. This woman documented everything, detailed logs, every cent received, every cent expended. She explained that she'd engaged in this practice even during periods when she'd had adequate funds. It was practically instinctive at this point. Now, while teetering at the margin, that notebook represented the sole thing standing between her and complete breakdown. The detailed accounting. She referenced the prior month. It contained 27 working days. She'd generated $22.95. She knew the exact figure, not rounded estimates. $22.95. Of that amount, $10 went straight toward rent, always prioritized, because the roof represents prerequisite everything. She'd existed in that building for 11 years. They'd elevated the rental twice during that span, $1 each instance. Still, she paid $10 monthly for 2 rooms on the ground level. Not the worst available arrangement. That left $12.95 for everything else. Nourishment expenses, coal, illumination, heating oil for the cooktop, cleaning soap, paper, because they did appreciate seeing a newspaper occasionally. Garments, when they became absolutely unwearable. Everything that sustained 2 individuals for an entire month required emerging from that $12.95 budget. She revealed her weekly expense documentation to the interviewer, a particular week's food spending, inscribed in her meticulous handwriting. An expensive week, she confessed almost defensively. She'd purchased an entire pound of butter simultaneously, but it would extend into the following week, so truly it balanced out. There wasn't any meat, she noted. They would have appreciated it, but they obtained merely tiny quantities occasionally on Sundays. Then this detail emerged, this minor human particular element that communicates more than any statistic ever could. Emmy never requires excessive amounts of nourishment. Operating a machine all day apparently suppresses appetite, though she enjoys clams. Clams existed as an affordable option in New York, readily obtainable. The vendors operating near the docks distributed them fresh. Twice throughout that documented week, the notebook indicated they'd consumed clams. Something modest, a tiny indulgence. Yet the mother remembered it, inscribed it in documentation, because Emmy appreciated clams, the innovation. Now here's something the mother determined independently, and it rescued them repeatedly. She'd previously read something in a newspaper roughly once, something about fabricating soup from the water left after boiling cabbage. A quart of the fluid, a cup of milk, a bit of butter, flour for thickening. You wouldn't imagine it could taste acceptable, yet it does, and it extends your resources substantially. Cabbage water soup. This particular recipe surfaces exclusively when you lack sufficient funds to discard anything. Liquid you'd normally pour down a drain transformed into something consumable. It registers as desperate because it genuinely was. Yet she didn't feel humiliation about it. She felt pride. She'd discovered methodology for expanding nothing into something. How could 12 cents worth of coal accomplish a week's cooking? She posed this question, responding to something nobody had inquired. It simply couldn't. It didn't. So she'd formulated an alternative approach, a small petroleum stove, the kind that simply boiled a kettle. Tea and bread and butter mostly, that's what they consumed. Yet a gallon of petroleum extended impressively far, and she could prepare small items above it as well. The laundering still consumed coal, and she required soap and everything accompanying that process. Yet, for ordinary daily food preparation, the petroleum stove answered the requirement. "I cannot envision how we'd expend less," she stated. "I've perfected managing even with what we currently get." And subsequently, because even individuals in poverty discover mechanisms for helping one another, she described her neighbor, a German woman. She lived on the 4th level, slipped on ice the preceding winter, and injured her ankle badly. The community care, the widow and Emmy, had attended to her until she regained walking capacity. Currently, the German woman wouldn't object to explaining her management strategies if the interviewer wanted ascending the staircase. Yet, before we climb those steps, you require understanding something additional, something that makes this narrative burn somewhat brighter or darker, depending on your perspective. While the widow was patching her footwear with fragments of her late husband's garment, while Emmy labored 14 hours for 85 cents, while they prepared cabbage water soup and tracked every penny in a notebook, the professional economists occupying the era were articulating why a poverty problem didn't genuinely exist in America. They possessed figures. They adored their figures. In 1860, they calculated if this country's property were distributed uniformly, every individual would receive $514. In 1870, that proportion would have totaled $624. In 1880, $814. And in 1886, precisely when our widow was tabulating her nickels, the economists approximated that uniform distribution would grant everyone exceeding $900. What insanity, they protested, when discussing deprivation while this wealth deluge traverses the nation. You perceive the mechanism, yes? The per capita computation. Aggregate your country's complete financial resources. Divide by complete population count. Pretend that computation signifies something legitimate, as if a factory proprietor's millions and a seamstress's nickels averaged out into universal comfort, as if financial resources had been distributed rather than concentrated upward. The overwhelming majority exist in perfectly sufficient circumstances, the economist articulated, granting that the lowest classes experience hardship. It's fundamentally criminality, drunkenness, and similar characteristics that generate suffering. Criminal activity, addiction, their individual moral shortcomings. That's the explanation for their poverty. not the 7 cents hourly compensation, not the residential costs consuming half of income, not the coal expensiveness because they couldn't acquire in wholesale quantities. No, they were impoverished because they deserved impoverishment, because they'd exercised poor judgment, because they weren't exerting themselves adequately. The widow in her tenement, patching footwear and monitoring her cabbage water, had never experienced intoxication in her entire existence. She'd never engaged in criminal behavior. She'd worked, she'd accumulated resources. She'd executed everything appropriately. Yet here she sat regardless. Let us examine exactly how comfortable Campbell articulated after experiencing story upon story resembling this one. Let us examine, shall we? Uptown, individuals perused the economist's analyses and acknowledged them with agreement, feeling comforted. The destitute were receiving adequate support. The arrangement functioned. Anybody contradicting this perspective was exaggerating or fabricating accounts or attempting to generate upheaval. The systems of exploitation. It proved simpler believing in that than scrutinizing the documentation in a widow's notebook. Simpler accepting per capita financial statistics than acknowledging 2 years without footwear. Simpler embracing that the general population experiences contentment than ascending 4 staircase flights to a 10-foot chamber where a German woman explains her survival on 45 cents daily, yet we'll climb those stairs momentarily. Initially, one additional detail regarding the widow. One further small component that communicates everything about daily existence. That week was expensive, she described regarding her food finances, because she'd purchased butter all simultaneously and they'd required scissors sharpening. Scissors sharpening, 5 cents. When your monthly budget reaches merely $12.95 for everything, 5 cents for sharpening scissors registers in your notebook. 5 cents constitutes something vital. She experienced compulsion clarifying it, legitimizing it, because it made the week appear costly. Despite the reality that sharpened scissors produced faster labor, finishing additional items, producing increased compensation, 5 cents would ultimately compensate for itself. She understood this, yet it still registered as an extravagance. There could have been 5 cents designated toward timber as well, she mentioned. Yet they're constructing down the avenue, and one of the young individuals living upstairs delivered me a container of fragments. Construction site scraps. Complimentary fuel, a neighboring youth's considerate gesture. That's how survival functioned, not merely through meticulous penny counting, but through membership in collective structures that maintained attention toward one another. That boy didn't require delivering her that timber. He simply did, because that's the appropriate action. The widow's chambers occupied the ground level. The German woman's quarters sat 4 levels higher. Between them existed the entire structure, a complete community of individuals performing identical calculations, making identical projections, determining how to manufacture substance from vacancy. The 4th floor, the staircase, ranked somewhat below the initial building concerning sanitation. Children overflowed throughout the halls and on the landing. The smell of a malfunctioning drainage system on one of the transitional areas, that particular aroma, embedded itself into everything, nearly impervious to cleansing. Yet ascending to the 4th floor in that 10-foot compartment featuring a single opening, a transformation appeared. Impeccable. Every fraction of that diminutive chamber received scrubbing organization, and maintenance, exhibiting the kind of determined self-respect that poverty couldn't diminish. The German woman maintained it in that manner. 65 years in age, compensated per working day when her body permitted labor, generating approximately $2.70 weekly, yet her quarters remained spotless. Precisely when the interviewer observed this, why wouldn't it be? She posed this as if the inquiry itself seemed strange, as if any other approach existed. She was prepared completely to articulate everything, her whole economic system, how everything connected, how every choice got calculated. The German woman's economy. She earned 45 cents daily, occasionally 50 when her body allowed work, which didn't occur consistently. Her physiology no longer complied the way it previously had. 65 years represented considerable duration, particularly when the overwhelming majority had been expended in strenuous activity. If I possessed the speed of youth, she articulated, I could accumulate much. Yet I carry 65 years. How shall one continue quickly? Her weekly income approached approximately $2.70. Occasionally, slightly more, sometimes considerably less. Estimate $10 monthly on average, $12 during fortunate months. Of that amount, $3 financed this 10-foot chamber on the structure's 4th level. $3. Yet her circumstances remained superior compared to certain others. That remaining amount? $7 for everything else. Observe her methodology meticulously. Bread precedes everything else. Rye varieties, because that maintains greater substance compared to refined wheat alternatives. Never white bread, the variety that puffs attractively yet abandons you hungry 60 minutes subsequently. Rye, dense, dark. The bread German immigrants recognized from their countries of origin, the variety that genuinely fills your abdomen and remains there. 5 cents per loaf. One loaf persists one complete day, some extending into the subsequent morning if she demonstrated care. Tea, perpetually tea. A 30-cent monthly investment purchased approximately a month's consumption, working out to roughly a cent daily. She'd consumed beer previously during Germany days. Everybody did. American beer functions differently, though. She'd observed females consuming it and descending gradually, becoming inebriated, surrendering themselves. She converted to tea. Tea signifies American civilization, meaning selecting tea here meant preservation of respectability. Cheese, when she could manage it, 10 cents per pound. 1 pound extended a week, if she demonstrated restraint. Liver sausage occasionally, 15 cents per pound. Optimal compensation for meat substances. 1 pound extended 7 calendar days if you sectioned it thinly. Sugar occasionally, a pound, sometimes 2, for her tea. Butter, never, 0 butter. Milk, once weekly. A cent's worth Sunday as indulgence. That constitutes her nutrition. Bread, tea, cheese, liver whenever feasible, honey and milk Sundays. Accumulate it, and the total reaches approximately 50 cents weekly for nourishment, perhaps 60 during elevated weeks. The choice between food and heat. Yet here's the component she mentioned subsequently, the element that remains with you. I consume not consistently all I possibly could, she articulated, for I must stay somewhat warm. She's selecting perpetually between nourishment and temperature. Cold demands compensation. Winter temperatures are authentic. Her aging structure experiences it in ways it previously didn't. Consequently, she consumes less than she could, consuming less than her anatomy wants, because she must conserve something for the heating apparatus, the warmth that sustains her through winter darkness. Subsequently came footwear. It proves challenging being sizable like myself, she articulated, because footwear doesn't persist. She possessed considerable frame. Her feet were considerable. Footwear deteriorated more rapidly. Substituting them demands resources she lacked. Subsequently, she remedied, she coped. She progressed with care to conserve what remained. Yet here exists where it turns strange. Or perhaps not strange, merely fundamentally human. I'm grateful to the good Lord, she articulated, that there exists nobody additional, no Hans or Lisa or anybody remaining famished with me. They've departed, and that's advantageous. Her family had expired, spouse, daughter named Lisa, possibly others. The documentation doesn't clarify, yet they'd vanished completely. She wasn't grateful because she didn't adore them. She definitely had. She was grateful because observing them experience starvation would have been more agonizing than experiencing it individually. Because nourishing herself already demonstrated difficulty without requiring her to examine eyes of individuals dependent upon her and communicating there's nothing additional available. That's poverty articulating itself, the category of deprivation where expiration becomes kindness, where you appreciate the Lord for leaving your meals because, at minimum, you fail only yourself. The neighbor below, she inhabits that 10-foot chamber independently, maintains it spotless, counts her resources, consumes less than she could, and appreciates that her family has departed. However, she isn't completely solitary. There's a female downstairs, juvenile woman specifically, who's unwell, cannot venture out anymore. An individual the German woman has embraced under her attention. In whatever manner, a 65-year-old residing on $7 monthly can embrace anybody under something you purchase for another person, the interviewer articulated, prompting. Certainly, the German woman answered, but she'll pass soon and worries not about it. That bluntness, that German directness. The female is perishing, and the German woman comprehends it and, pretending otherwise, achieves nothing. Passing comes. The sole variable is happening between current moment and then. It's supporting that occurs, she proceeded. The young adults occupy the quarters downstairs, 16 and 18, unable to create wages. Subsequently, there's a household below, a mother deteriorating gradually, a grandfather aging, youngsters sufficient for working, though not presently producing, for factors the documentation doesn't communicate. Perhaps occupations don't exist. Perhaps they're required remaining. Perhaps they're afflicted additionally. Whatever the situation, they produce nothing, and the mother barely sustains them animate. She stitches continuously at the apparatus. It's kids' cloaks, she articulated, thus brilliant and attractive. Children's cloaks, the elaborate category affluent mothers acquire for their infants. 2 linings, a cape section, cuffs featuring scalloped patterns, everything stitched and secured and finished. The labor demands specificity. It absolutely requires it. Prosperous individuals observe particulars. 2 days of labor produces 3 cloaks complete. You comprehend the complexity. 2 complete linings, cape piece, cuff with scalloped patterns, all demanding initial stitching, then securing, subsequently finishing. Finishing spans completely interior, thus attractive. The German woman maintained something resembling appreciation toward the labor's caliber, the proficiency demanded. This expiring female gradually was manufacturing gorgeous items maintaining some prosperous infant comfortably, items receiving commendation in parlors way uptown. Yet $8 monthly for a dozen. $8 for 12 cloaks. That represents about 66 cents each for something requiring 48 hours of effort. Complete the computation. 48 hours approximately equals 3 complete working days. 12 individual cloaks divided by 48 complete hours, approximately 4 hours for each, produces nearly 20 cents per hour for labor demanding genuine competence, actual precision, genuine craftsmanship. And she couldn't sustain that. The week brought 9 cloaks. Subsequently, she generated not exceeding $5 weekly due to her sickness, necessitating halts. 9 cloaks weekly, $6 compensation from those specific rates. The female remained excessively unwell for completing the comprehensive allocation. She'd created maybe $5. Subsequently, from that $5, she required compensating rent. $5.50 monthly, surpassing a complete week's income simply for the chamber. The computations don't function. They can't. But there's the grandfather who remains aged, the German woman proceeded, and a kid, and she absolutely must keep them alive. An aged individual incapable of creating income, a youngster incapable of creating income, a perishing mother representing the sole compensation generator, $5 weekly on fortunate occasions, $5.50 for housing expenses. Prior to addressing nutrition, before heating fuel, prior to anything, they're already beneath. Subsequently, the German woman intervened. I contributed this week $1.60, 16 cents for her, utilizing the funds for bread, tea, potatoes, some milk, and molasses for the youngster to distribute across bread since butter costs excessive, she articulated. 16 cents. Approaching a quarter of the German woman's entire weekly compensation provided to the family downstairs for bread, for tea, for potatoes, for the modest elements sustaining living beings. Molasses applied to her youngster's bread because butter exceeded financial reach. Nourishment required substance to accompany plain bread, yet never meat, never meat. The grandfather consumes excessively, the German woman contributed, yet how shall one manage it? An aged male possessing hunger. Possibly his cognition deteriorates. Perhaps he doesn't grasp exactly how minimal resources exist. Perhaps he simply experiences hunger the manner aged anatomies do, and 0 inhabitants possess the cardiac capacity for communicating, cease consuming. Subsequently, he ingests, and the youngsters go slightly hungrier. The perishing caretaker portions thinner. The German woman digs somewhat more profoundly in her $7 monthly allocation. How shall one manage it? That's not interrogation. That's capitulation. There simply exists 0 mechanism to manage. The grandfather will consume his consumption. The youngsters will do without. The female will perish ultimately. Subsequently, what? What surfaces when nobody stays for fabricating infant garments? Everything remains sealed for all, the German woman remarked, implying the forthcoming remains determined, implying there's nowhere to traverse, implying ending occurs here. Yet there exists 0 footwear for the youngsters, she supplemented. I witness not if footwear will emerge. The juveniles lack shoes. Winter approaches, or perhaps it's presently here. Somewhere in a West Side tenement, youngsters numbering 16 and 18 possess a perishing female parent, whose father consumes excessive portions, who remain shoeless. How shall it be? Yet another non-interrogation, yet another capitulation. She possesses zero understanding, absolutely no one comprehends. The feet covering will emerge, or they won't. The youngsters will manage, or they won't. The female will persist in extension, otherwise she won't. The German woman will continue ascending those chambers, continue acquiring bread, tea, potatoes for the family existing below, continue scrubbing her personal chamber spotless, continue consuming insufficient quantities to preserve minimal warmth. Because what additional option exists? She might cease. She might maintain that 16 cents personally, acquire butter, acquire minimal meat, consume till satisfied for maybe one time. Nobody would allocate accountability. She barely possesses adequate for her own condition. Maintaining a differing household when you're 65 years old and receiving $2.70 weekly isn't gallant. It's ridiculous. Yet she does so regardless. Perhaps she recollects Lisa. Perhaps she remembers Hans. Perhaps she's experienced exactly what it resembles observing someone you cherish deteriorate gradually, and she couldn't withstand experiencing it repeatedly, even toward outsiders. Perhaps this comprises exactly who she's become, not damaged, not ruthless, merely distinct, explicit regarding what contains significance, explicit regarding activities when practically nothing remains available for distributing. You distribute nevertheless. 16 cents weekly for bread, tea, potatoes. For youngsters, absent shoes. For a perishing female manufacturing gorgeous infant cloaks, compensated cents on the dollar for her craftsmanship. For an aged individual consuming excessive, because how shall anyone manage it? The German woman positioning herself in her immaculate chamber, her saucepan occupying the heating apparatus, her opening permitting whatever limited illumination the air shaft supplied. She's articulated her account, explained her calculations, demonstrated the mechanism for existing on nearly nothing if you remained meticulous, disciplined, if you'd accumulated 65 years of instruction in requiring smaller quantities than requirements. Subsequently, she'll descend downstairs for inspecting the expiring female, observing the infant cloak advancement, potentially delivering soup from that saucepan provided sufficient remained for distributing. The conversation has concluded. The calculations received recording. The account got narrated. Yet it hasn't genuinely finished. Tomorrow, the German woman'll rouse in her 10-foot chamber and tabulate her resources repeatedly. The expiring female'll position herself at her apparatus and fabricate scalloped cuff attachments onto brilliant diminutive cloaks. The youngsters'll navigate the chilled flooring barefoot. The grandfather'll consume excessive. Somewhere toward the area above, a prosperous female caretaker'll clothe her infant in one among those gorgeous cloaks and never consider the fingers that manufactured it. Never ponder the female stitching while expiring. Never conceive of the chamber location, the structure, the staircase, the malfunctioning drainage, the German female on the 4th-story level acquiring bread for communities that aren't hers because her personal community simply vanished. She appreciates that God arranged it thus. That's the operational mechanism. That's perpetually operated similarly. The collection upstairs and the collection downstairs, connected via thread and material and compensatory structures flowing singular direction exclusively. The cloak may be expenses $5 in a commerce toward the municipal area. The female who fabricated it gathered 66 cents. Distinctions. The middleman, the manufacturing facility, the proprietor, The organizational system. Everyone obtained their allocation, excluding the fingers implementing the actual labor. $8 monthly. That constitutes proficiency expense. That constitutes expirations expense. Somewhere in your individual time, the darkness has intensified. That drowsiness might be asserting itself currently. Your stomach remains full. Your feet stay comfortably warm. You've never selected between nutrition and thermal comfort. Never experienced gratitude that your relatives passed away, that you wouldn't witness them gradually perishing alongside you. Somebody did. Loads of somebodies in 1886. In chambers you'll never observe. In municipalities you'll never venture. They produced that selection continuously. They remained alive on bread, tea, and optimism, on consideration from neighboring individuals possessing nearly nothing for distributing, on the brutal mathematics of poverty, and certain individuals somehow preserve their chambers spotless regardless. Why, in the identical structure, differing floor, sat yet another lady with her individual account, Swiss, that specimen, and she'd tumbled considerably to arrive at that location. She'd previously been a lady's maid. Contemplate that for seconds. A female domestic worker throughout the earlier period, within grand residences, outfitted with quality clothing and adequate nutrition, and acquiring education about food preparation via the culinary specialists. That was her existence previously. Compensation, definitely, yet satisfactory compensation, the variety of operational position wherein you rested in genuine furniture and consumed at legitimate tables, and comprehended the origin of your subsequent nutrition. Subsequently, she relocated to America, discovered a male, married him, and he exhibited excessive drinking habits. Not casually, substantially. The quantity of drinking consuming preservation equivalently to ignition consuming papers. Anything she'd accumulated via her employment years vanished. Everything she produced while wedded, gone. Downward his esophagus and out, absolutely nothing displaying except unfilled bottles and dishonored guarantees. By the documentation captured her, she'd matured, physically unable for residential work any longer, which she continuously categorized as the most satisfactory and extremely compensating labor available for females. Her physiology couldn't manage the hoisting, the staircase climbing, the prolonged stationary periods. Subsequently, she discovered production facility employment, the variety unconcerned with maturity, provided your appendages continued mobility. She completed buckle stitching onto suspenders, $2 weekly. That's the compensation for her remaining temporal investment. $2 for however numerous hours they allocated her. The female who'd formerly maintained positions throughout magnificent residences, who'd experienced real nourishment and legitimate sleeping quarters, was terminating her existence adhering metallic components to flexible material in an commercial setting reeking of petroleum and desperation. Yet here's the distinction regarding her, the element distinguishing her from nearly everybody else occupying that structure. She possessed cooking competence, not merely hydrating water for tea, authentic cooking. She'd acquired instruction throughout infancy during her residential setting, and she'd perpetually maintained that awareness. And whenever the visitor entered her chamber, a saucepan occupied her diminutive heating apparatus, and interior existed something resembling genuine nutrition. Everything residing in that saucepan comprises merely 7 cents, she articulated. 7 cents. She itemized it. 3 cents. Financed bones and supplementary fragments that the considerate butcher contributed, remaining resources channeled toward vegetation and grain. That 7-cent expenditure of supplies produced adequate soup for sustaining her throughout 2 complete calendar days. I maintain lentils, she proceeded. Indeed, and legumes, and considerable diversity of flavor-making elements. Legumes, vegetation, grain, genuine nutrition. The classification of material manufacturing musculature and preserving skeletal frameworks and supplying duration that doesn't evaporate hours subsequently. She existed on considerably under $100 monthly dedicated to sustenance while maintaining significantly superior consumption compared to individuals expending double that amount. Sundays brought rye bread and coffee. Absolutely never tea. Oh, certainly not, she articulated. Tea proves excessively wicked. It produces handshaking and psychological spinning in circles. The caffeine, she specified, the shakiness, the manner tea could create your digits tremble and your cognitive processes scatter. She'd witnessed what it activated in surrounding females, ways they depended on it. They couldn't function without it. She desired zero component. Superior soup serves optimally, she articulated, plus substantially when you got vegetation plenty and fresh garden components, and when I earn greater compensation, I acquire some eggs, yet certainly never tea. She maintained viewpoints regarding bread similarly. Certainly not enlarged white loaf variety, she articulated. That expands plus expands internally, and when consumed, abandons you additionally vacant. White bread, the economical American variation that appeared impressive and completed your abdomen for 60 minutes, subsequently departed you hungrier. She'd determined what nutritional experts wouldn't substantiate for subsequent 50 calendar years. White bread comprised fundamentally emptiness. It expanded beautifully, yet produced insufficient substance for maintaining grasp. The grain-based rye bread, the darkened substance emerging from German commercial establishments that maintained functionality. She endeavored education for neighbors. That possibly constituted the most sorrowful component. I practice occasional instruction attempts, she communicated. I deliver samples of my broth, plus they consume it, pronouncing it delicious. However, they merely cannot devote such extended periods functioning. That constitutes excessive fuss. That terminology surfaces yet again. Fuss. Identical terminology alternate females implemented. Comparable dismissal. Indeed, your broth tastes superior. Indeed, we perceive it surpasses what we're getting, yet we cannot execute your actions. We don't command adequate temporal allocation. We don't command sufficient vitality. We don't command adequate knowledge. And realistically, even possessing everything, we'd probably persist declining given the 14-hour machinery stretches. Concluding your day exhausted constitutes merely introducing supplementary responsibilities. I'd educate lots, she articulated, yet they wouldn't want it. They demand merely tea, perpetually tea. This is when we'll need to seriously investigate tea, genuinely investigate it, since it represented something beyond mere beverage within these chambers. It constituted something extra, something problematic, something maintaining the entire machinery operating. A guest presented one fabric female a reasonable inquiry. If you jointly gathered, couldn't someone prepare meals collectively? Manufacturing satisfactory broth plus grain preparations plus materials that nourish, you'd obtain greater physical capacity subsequently. The female answered again, more powerfully. Physiological strength designated for what? Let this statement settle. Greater power intended for what? Supplementary machinery rotations, she proceeded, grinding your personal physiology plus skeletal structure into powder for the collection supervising us. This isn't complaint. This constitutes analysis with perceptiveness. She comprehended precisely what happened. Her anatomy represented energy. Her labor generated merchandise, yet the collection upstairs extracted each remaining value previous breaking down completely. Obtaining stronger wouldn't support her. It would support them. She'd persist longer preceding collapse. She'd manufacture extra previous. She expired. Subsequently, why bother the resistance to help? The guest continued somewhat, suggesting collaborative efforts, resource pooling, organized cooking arrangements. Definitely they could manufacture sense. Mom, the female articulated, and you'll perceive the exhaustion within it, psychological capacity diminishing. It appears you genuinely aspire benefiting. I won't dispute your comprehension exceeds certain visits. Everything you're articulating collective arrangement, potentially we'd achieve. I don't refute feasibility. However, presence of sufficient temporal availability, that's the challenge. Who encompasses temporal availability, even carrying dedication? She possessed rightness. The computational procedures couldn't function. 14 machinery hours. Commute duration on top. Sleep whenever collectible. Food preparation, consume duration. Supply acquiring consume duration. Organizing collective kitchen for instructor brimming with exhausted females, consume duration that nobody retained. Subsequently, she introduced something that provided substantial clarification. I never possessed cooking competence genuinely. We perpetually possessed tea, bread, plus occasionally fried beef or pork. When my partner inhabited this existence executing productive activities, he appreciated not fancy objects like legumes and that classification. When her partner lived, when financial contribution occurred, even subsequently, they didn't prepare substantially. Tea, bread, periodic fried meat, when they possessed capability for acquiring. That represented convention. That represented understanding. Acquiring cooking ability this far through, possessing executed it identically eternally, seemed insurmountable. Even harboring temporal availability, she possessed zero desire. It's the tea retaining you conscious, she articulated, and while I possibly acquire that, I'll not contemplate legumes. Tea maintains you functioning. That represented the crucial insight. Machinery demanded attentiveness. 14 rotations of cognitive engagement, managing material beneath a needle that'd happily puncture your appendage if attention wandered. You couldn't implement that labor groggily. You couldn't implement that labor drowsy. You needed elements increasing cognitive clarity, traversing exhaustion, sustaining sight lines unfogged, and appendages coordinated whenever every element in you desired surrender. The perfect exploitation tea accomplished that. The caffeine, the temperature, the ceremonial components, cup after cup constantly, preserving the peripheral sharpness, preserving appendages mobile, preserving the treadle mechanisms operating. The documentation acknowledged this correlation. Tea plus machinery, somebody transcribed, function as clearly inseparable allies. And for the reason that fabric females necessarily labor 14 rotations continuously, they'll persist identically. Tea postponed digestion, suppressed hunger, permitted labor extension through insufficient consumption. It represented the excellent substance designated for an exploitative workforce, insufficient potency for illegality, insufficient expense for inaccessibility. simply sufficient effectiveness for sustaining machinery operating. One female portrayed the hunger, sometimes penetrating. Occasionally, you'll get ferocious, tearing hunger, she articulated. Appears as if you'd ingest a thermal pot or whatever exists convenient for filling. Ferocious, ripping hunger, the variety abandoning background sensation, transforming into something overwhelming. The variety making you desire consuming anything, all things. Your personal appendage, if scenarios permitted. However, that doesn't occur regularly, she contributed. Fortunate for us. Fortunate. She designated it fortunate that she stayed perpetually excessively worn for recognizing how famished she'd turned. Fortunate the tea suppressed appetite plenty for bread, plus butter appearing sufficient. Fortunate her anatomy had educated itself to anticipate nothing and remain appreciative for insufficient. The Swiss female in her chamber, possessing her 7-cent broth and her convictions regarding grain bread, transcended the tea mechanism via comprehension and self-control, possibly merely Swiss stubbornness. She ingested genuine nourishment at diminished costs compared to colleagues expending multiple times that acquiring bread plus tea, plus she probably stayed physiologically superior for consideration, yet she couldn't educate others. They wouldn't desire studying. The tea maintained them, and they maintained tea, and the two collaborated maintaining machinery functioning. There's somewhat sophisticated regarding it in a horrible manner. Independently maintaining mechanism, operate 14 rotations, obtain compensation barely sufficient living, expend everything towards nutrition that doesn't feed correctly plus tea that keeps functioning, persist excessively worn, plus excessively famished for transforming anything. Continue till you're incapable. Continue till perishing. The economists uptown might produce their documentations regarding per capita resources. Manufacturing proprietors might praise themselves regarding productivity. Proprietors might elevate compensatory demands, another $1. Plus, downward in the chambers, females were converting their anatomies, plus skeletal structures, into powder, designated for the collection supervising us. And they designated that fortunate whenever they felt excessively worn to comprehend. Greater physical ability for what? This inquiry remained suspended in every tenement kitchen. Every instance some motivated reformer proposed superior nutrition, supplementary physical movement, self-betterment. Greater strength for what? So we create superior merchandise? So we manufacture surplus compensation for individuals who've gathered extra compared to they'll invest? The mechanism didn't desire well individuals. It desired economical individuals. People agreeing to 7 cents hourly and remaining appreciative. Individuals consuming tea as substitute for consuming meals since tea remained economical. Individuals destroying themselves, subsequently changing for subsequent immigration collections, willing reproducing identically. The Swiss female comprehended this. The stitching females comprehended this. Absolutely everybody within those structures comprehended this. They merely couldn't transform anything. The persistence. Subsequently, they drank their tea. They consumed their bread. They positioned themselves at machinery and activated treadles and steered material and monitored moments and attempted disregarding tomorrow. Simultaneously, somewhere in that structure on this 4th floor, an aging Swiss female mixed her 7-cent broth and wished anybody would let her educate them. Just one individual, just somebody desiring studying. Yet they appreciated nothing. They desired merely tea. The mid-morning reaches. You're persisting in 1886, however, the illumination via the air shaft openings transitions. Golden mostly, the classification of luminescence making even the most melancholy locales seem briefly gorgeous. The stitching apparatus continue operating. You hear them via divisions, above, that persistent mechanical pulsation. Somewhere in this structure, Emmy bends her form over her activity, gaining her 85 cents. Another location, the expiring female finishes scalloped cuff portions onto infant cloaks. Yet another location, a female distributes additional thermal beverage since that comprises everything maintaining her cognitive function conscious. The Swiss female possessed her background with beverage addiction differently. Certainly not her consumption, her companions. She'd observed alcohol perform toward this male what machinery performed toward these females. Use everything up. Leave zero, besides the facade of prior humanity. Possibly that's the reason she stayed away from tea. Possibly she recognized something acquainted within the manner her associates depended on it. The manner they couldn't commence the calendar day without it. The manner they converted irritable whenever the pot depleted. The manner it had transformed into not alternative, yet requirement. Woven so profoundly into lives that they couldn't conceive operating without it. She'd previously forfeited existence to a male incapable of terminating alcohol consumption. She wasn't intending forfeiting yet another toward a container unable ceasing boiling. Subsequently, she manufactured her broth as alternative. Skeleton fragments, plus vegetation, plus grain, bubbling away via her diminutive apparatus. Genuine nourishment, genuine substance. The classification of meal you could sense performing internally, develop in physique instead of merely retaining consciousness, prolonged enough for self-destruction. 3 cents toward skeleton fragments. The butcher delivered complementary supplementary components simply because she aged appropriately behaved politely and possibly reminded him regarding somebody. Remainder transferred toward whatever vegetation cost minimum that specific calendar day. Salad typically, root vegetables when she possessed excess, grain for consistency, furnishing substance, making it persist your abdominal cavity such as bread plus tea, never managed. 7 cents. A pair of cycles of genuine consumption. Authentic consumption. Certainly not the emptiness of grain bread. Certainly not the jittery consciousness of tea, merely sustenance executing as sustenance was supposed to function. The final hours. The comedic element comprises that she'd probably educate them. These females weren't unintelligent. They remained exhausted, plus captured, yet weren't unintelligent. Supplying temporal duration, vitality, position for studying. They'd resolve what the Swiss female comprehended. They'd manufacture broth as replacement for acquiring bread. They'd expend lesser, yet consume superior. They'd interrupt the repetition. Potentially solitary container of skeleton fragments at intervals. Yet nobody provided that temporal availability. That comprised the whole factor. The mechanism performed upon their exhaustion. It required them excessively worn for cognitive functioning, excessively desperate for gathering, excessively addicted to tea for conceiving different methodology. Modification demanded vigor, and vigor represented what manufacturing centers were removing. 14 machinery rotations, 7-cent compensatory amounts for every instance. Appendages operating the treadle till your flanks hurt. Appendages directing material till they contracted. sight concentrating via the needle till everything grew hazy. Concluding it, what did you possess? 85 cents if circumstances cooperated, adequate for implementing identically tomorrow, adequate for compensating the proprietor, adequate for purchasing bread plus tea plus maintain yourself, animate for lengthier duration, previous disintegrating. Greater for what, genuinely? The Swiss female mixed her broth plus contemplated the magnificent structures where she'd previously operated, the kitchens housing copper merchandise and roasting devices and flour containers, the meals she'd supported preparing for individuals who'd never questioned provision's derivation, the remaining portions the maintenance personnel got distributing afterwards the proprietors fed, that represented another era, another location, another female mostly. The individual existing in this tenement location with this 7-cent broth plus this $2 compensation resembled the female who'd educated cooking inside a Swiss location 40 periods of time previously barely. Yet the knowledge remained. You cannot remove anything. Financial resources, the companion, your childhood, desire, yet you cannot remove knowledge. She maintained awareness regarding production from nothing, maintained awareness regarding which skeleton fragments supplied maximum taste, which vegetation extended maximum distance, which combinations manufactured the distinction between persisting plus genuinely experiencing, plus she'd educate anybody desiring studying. Yet they appreciated nothing. They desired merely tea. Within the fourth platform of a West Side framework, in a chamber calculating 10 feet through 10 feet, an aging Swiss female mixed her broth, plus desired anybody would understand. Throughout the rooms below, females bent above machinery apparatus, plus drank their tea, plus tabulated durations, till surrender. Somewhere upstairs, the German female probably transferred groceries toward the expiring female's relatives, expending money. She couldn't manage losing on bread. She couldn't manage obtaining. Plus, outside, the solar transferred further westward toward the stream. The proximate the stream, the proximate to perdition, somebody had stated. Yet even perdition possessed its instances of splendor. Even present, inside the degradation, illumination might transform golden for certain minutes. Previously darkness emerged. You're observing it immediately. That luminescence transferring via the air shaft opening, grabbing the airborne particles, creating everything appear nearly relaxing. Nearly. Yet machinery persists rotating. Tea persists boiling. Plus, tomorrow remain precisely resembling today, till somebody decides acquiring broth understanding. Yet that isn't happening. Certainly not currently. Probably certainly not perpetually. The mechanism stays excessively powerful. The tiredness stays excessively comprehensive. The tea stays excessively straightforward. Modification would demand something separating. Plus, nothing separating presently. Certainly not observable. Certainly not yet. The system persists. Subsequently, the Swiss female mixed her broth, plus the stitching females drank their tea, plus machinery maintained running, plus the solar maintained transitioning, plus 1886 maintains grinding ahead, a single moment throughout duration. Perpetually the tea, perpetually the apparatus, perpetually tomorrow. Helen Campbell didn't have confidence in economists. That's the opening component you'll want knowing about her. She'd examined their compositions, heard their presentations, observed them maneuver census information resembling magical implements, like figures within publications, might make deprivation vanish. $900 per individual, they articulated. State assets, uniformly dispersed. What delusion regarding discussing deprivation? She regarded that as refuse, communicated as much, designated them unconscious, unable observing beyond their individual calculations. Subsequently, she implemented something distinct. She progressed amongst the populace personally. The Tenements, life on 12 cents a day. Part 2, Campbell's investigation in the system. She traveled through tenements methodically, structure after structure, dwelling after dwelling, ascending stairways that sagged while navigating hallways permeating with odors. She knocked repeatedly and posed inquiries that absolutely nobody possessing financial resources had bothered investigating. How do you manage your existence? What do you consume? Precisely, where does the compensation transfer? Straightforward inquiries, yet devastating answers emerged. Repeatedly, the occupants throughout the West Side transmitted their complete accounts. The widow, with her meticulous recording. The German female with her 7-cent broth. The Swiss female who'd previously worked as a household domestic. The expiring female manufacturing infant cloaks. Account upon account, entrance upon entrance, similar brutal computational procedures performing in multiple chambers. Once Campbell compiled information, once she examined the organization surfacing throughout all those specific accounts, she discovered something the economists had overlooked completely. 90 cents. That represented the typical amount. 90 cents weekly per individual designated toward nutrition. Certainly not luxurious consumption. Certainly not sufficient consumption for health. Merely the absolute minimum that retained individuals living, operating, communicating, and functioning. Baker's grain bread, tea, honey, minimal dairy, minimal vegetable oil, periodic meat instances when circumstances permitted. 90 cents? Approximately 13 cents daily. That's what persisting required throughout 1886 Manhattan if you reduced your needs completely. If you cut every angle. If you consumed simply what your body required for breathing continuation, and several couldn't accomplish that, devoid of surrendering something essential. The German female on the 4th level expended insufficient compared to that. 50, occasionally 60 cents weekly. She achieved it by consuming insufficient for her anatomical capability, preferring thermal comfort versus nutrition, appreciating that her relatives remained deceased so she wouldn't require observing them perish alongside her. The economics of poverty. The widow downstairs expended additional, yet she possessed Emmy to contemplate. Plus, even subsequently, absolutely no meat besides Sundays, 0 feet protection throughout 24 months, every penny documented within a recording because the computational span represented precisely nothing. The expiring female manufacturing infant cloaks couldn't even reach that 90-cent typical. $5 weekly designated toward a group numbering 4. That's $1.25 per individual. Remove $5.50 designated toward housing, plus you're currently beneath. Previously, you've obtained solitary grain bread portion. Campbell identified this collection every location she transferred. Matching meals appearing on matching platforms, matching computations getting made in matching limited cooking spaces. It wasn't insufficient imagination within these females. It wasn't insufficient comprehension regarding vegetables or legumes or meal stability. This system had them captured completely. Absolutely everything within those chambers got obtained in diminutive portions. Certainly not due to individual preference because alternative didn't exist. Heating element via the container, 12 cents for a container's cost, which appears manageable till you comprehend a ton of heating element costs, possibly $5 or perhaps $6, whenever you obtained everything simultaneously. By the duration you'd completed sufficient containers generating a ton, you'd invested $12, multiplying the price exponentially. Timber via the cluster, heating petroleum via the measure, provisions marketed in minimal portions at maximal multiplication. The grocer comprehended. The heating element distributor comprehended. The proprietor comprehended. Absolutely every individual distributing anything toward the destitute comprehended precisely what they performed. You couldn't obtain wholesale because you didn't possess initial compensation. You couldn't accumulate in volume because you didn't possess the chamber. You couldn't arrange forward since you remained perpetually uncertain if subsequent rotation would transport employment or affliction or something unexpected, consuming whatever you'd managed preserving. Subsequently, you compensated additional designated for insufficient. Moment by moment, container by container, cluster by cluster, the destitution multiplication applied toward absolutely everything you interacted with. Plus this identical reality extended toward anything distributed. That's the element that ignites if you enabled yourself, considering it seriously. The merchant's knowledge. The merchants comprehended they extracted supplementary earnings from individuals who couldn't manage it. They comprehended the computational procedures. They comprehended that offering heating element via the container signified multiplying earnings per ton. They accomplished it regardless, since the destitute would compensate, because the destitute required compensating, because whenever the substitute signified freezing, you'd compensate whatever requested. Campbell monitored every detail, recorded it, transcribed it downward in meticulous sections, identical manner the widow inscribed in her recording. Confirmations designated toward everything, accounts from everybody. Certainly not fanciful illustrations, she stressed, merely the verity, since it genuinely existed in the chambers. Plus, the verity remained straightforward. The mechanism had been manufactured to remove resources from individuals who possessed least. Yet the West Side wasn't the singular side. Manhattan retained a pair of aspects toward its destitution. Plus, they differentiated in techniques that mattered significantly. The West Side territory, oriented toward the Hudson, represented Irish identification mostly. Dock laborers, familial clusters, each day employment personnel. The carpenter who'd stated, quote one, that complete growth of deprivation stretching from slaughtering repositories northward to the point where respectability commenced. The East Side demonstrated difference. More compacted for certain, additional crammed. The structures there didn't merely function as residential spaces, they functioned as metropolitan regions, layered 5+6 levels, overflowing with relatives in each obtainable region. The populace demonstrated difference additionally. The East Side's different struggles. Germans immigrated extensively from Deutschland regions. Little Germany, they designated it, complete avenue clusters wherein you might traverse for extended durations, never perceiving any English. Commercial establishments baking that grain composition. Butchers marketing liver varieties plus blood meat products. Gathering locations wherein males congregated following labor. A lifestyle relocated completely from the original homeland, persisting within the novel location. Russian Jewish populations entering by the thousands. Traversing persecution that the majority of Americans couldn't picture, establishing themselves in the sectors around Rivington, Hester, as well as Division, transporting their employment abilities with them, mostly stitching abilities, primarily the fabric trades, masculine plus feminine plus young individuals bending downward above apparatus in chambers that simultaneously functioned as cooking locations that simultaneously functioned as sleeping quarters. Italians throughout the Mulberry locations, the worst blocks within the municipality, certain individuals expressed, bandit residences, vessel alleyway, designations that communicated everything regarding the reputation designation of the location. Rag collectors plus day laborers, the newest arrivals accepting whatever employment they could obtain at whatever compensation provided. Every cluster possessed its individual deprivation version, its individual dietary variety, its individual traditions, its individual techniques for extending vacancy into substance. The German females manufactured broths like the Swiss female did whenever they possessed ability. The Jewish populations maintained Sabbath even whenever there existed barely grain for blessing. The Italian grandmothers sustained their cooking locations regarding the manner the German female sustained her chamber cleanliness, since certain items you gripped regardless of surrounding circumstances. The sweating system. The Jewish tailor throughout the East Side operated within circumstances, transforming the West Side into almost pleasant comparison. Complete familial clusters within a singular chamber, paternal figure at a particular apparatus, maternal figure at another, juvenile individuals removing material plus categorizing fasteners plus executing whatever diminutive activities their diminutive appendages could handle. The labor never paused. Sunrise through nightfall, regularly extending past 15 rotations, 16 extended periods, occasionally 18 throughout the expansion period whenever transactions accumulated plus producers demanded supplementary items. They designated it the exhaustion mechanism. They weren't implementing poetic language. An independent contractor would obtain a substantial transaction from a manufacturing center, subsequently distribute it toward tenement employees, compensating via the component, preserving the distinction as earnings. The employees received insufficient compared to manufacturing facility compensation. The contractor obtained his earnings. The manufacturing center received its merchandise devoid of contemplating regarding operational chambers or circumstances or the number of youngsters getting functionally worn out. Throughout a single chamber, throughout Essex location, a familial cluster numbering 6 created knee garments. Compensation totaled 4 cents monthly. Contemplate that consideration. 40 cents designated toward a dozen sets of leg wear. Every combined set demanded reduction, stitching, completion. Estimate 40 minutes minimal labor, designated toward a dozen minimum distributed throughout the complete household. That registers approximately 7 cents total for the group. Pennies per individual per rotation of applied effort. Plus, they remained appreciative regarding the employment simply because devoid of it, absolutely nothing remained. Campbell's documentation and the truth Campbell's documentation accumulated. She documented scenarios. She documented calculations. She documented situations that demonstrated precisely how ladies survived, the techniques they implemented, the selections they created. What happened toward these particular females? The documentation doesn't communicate. Campbell transferred forward regarding different investigations. Additional chronicles got transmitted. The females persisted managing their lives or discontinued managing them. Everything else, their monikers disappeared from documentation. Emmy might have obtained a companion, might have discovered that possibility her maternal figure persisted anticipating, or she might have remained positioned throughout apparatus till it consumed her, till her optical perception declined, plus her appendages contracted, plus she transformed toward supplementary physiology inside Potter's location. The German female existed 65 whenever Campbell encountered her. She contained a couple additional rotations, perhaps. Couple additional wintertime cycles, selecting between nutrition plus thermal comfort, plus subsequently she vanished, plus her chamber refilled containing somebody else's possessions, somebody else's battles. The expiring female manufacturing infant cloaks remained currently declining. Campbell comprehended it. Everybody comprehended it. The singular matter resided whether she'd persisted sufficient period observing her juvenile individuals develop, observing them generating compensation, comprehending they'd persist devoid of her. These don't comprise cheerful conclusions, simply because cheerful conclusions didn't exist. The mechanism that captured them didn't suddenly transform kindly. The resources that traversed around them didn't suddenly materialize. They managed, plus persisted, plus expired, plus the chambers refilled containing contemporary relatives executing identically. Nevertheless, the accounts persisted, the quantities persisted. The information indicating the comprehensive majority didn't exist within completely sufficient circumstances, indicating the resources never distributed, indicating the mechanism generated the deprivation it attributed toward the destitute. The lasting impact, the information, mattered. It still contained significance now, simply because the contentions haven't modified substantially compared to you'd imagine. The per capita computations, the declarations indicating the financial system demonstrates potency, indicating growth happens, indicating the calculations verify, everything performs effectively. The recommendation that whenever individuals demonstrate hardship, it represents their individual responsibility. Distinct quantities currently, distinct sums, yet the matching fundamental methodology. Aggregate the overall riches, partition via the aggregate populace, proclaim the situation completely solved. You've encountered these contentions. You'll encounter them repeatedly. Plus, whenever you do, you could recollect the widow in her ground-level chambers, her recording, her 12 cents daily, her female child who appreciated clams, plus never implemented mistakes. The comprehensive majority remain completely sufficient. Let's observe precisely how sufficient. That characterizes Campbell's function participating in a custom. Previously her, there'd been Dickens illustrating London's destitute. Subsequently, there'd be Jacob Riis possessing his digital apparatus within the chambers, Upton Sinclair within the meat commercial operations, Studs Terkel carrying his documentation apparatus throughout the unemployment period, individuals who abstain from enabling the cozy disregard, the uncomfortable, who transmitted documentation explaining what the mathematics omitted, who affixed numerals plus designations plus particular components toward the abstracts permitting deprivation becoming dismissible. It represents essential functioning, unending functioning, simply because each era manufactures additional computational specialists with additional calculations confirming everything performs satisfactorily. Plus, each era requires somebody prepared, ascending the pathways, plus knocking at the entrances, plus posing the straightforward inquiry, precisely how do you manage your existence? The endless struggle. The solution consistently demonstrates greater difficulty compared to the quantities recommend, perpetually increasingly sophisticated, perpetually comprises selections that absolutely no person should need to create, like whether to compensate your expired companion's financial commitment or preserve designated toward the subsequent disaster, like whether to obtain heat, alternatively obtain nutrition, like whether to educate your adjacent individuals regarding superior meal preparation or acknowledge they lack the interval. Selections persist, getting created precisely now in your municipal region, in each municipal region. The frameworks possess distinct designations currently. The apparatus operates distinctly currently, distinct varieties of pulverizing labor. Nevertheless, the computational procedure stays identical. Precisely how do you extend everything you obtain? Precisely how do you persist designated toward everything provided? Campbell aspired for individuals to pose that interrogation, aspired for them to genuinely pose it. Certainly not since abstraction, however, since genuine circumstance. Precisely what would you consume designated toward 12 cents daily? Precisely how would you maintain temperature? Precisely what would you forfeit? Your sleeping location suspends you gently currently. The period has become comprehensive depth. The quantities throughout Campbell's documentation have extended considering time, the writing vanishing toward the passage. Nevertheless, the substance they carried, the meticulous monitoring of impossible persisting, that lingers someplace in this metropolitan area, within metropolitan areas everywhere. Individuals persist performing the computation, persist determining precisely how to extend everything they obtain, persist selecting between temperature plus nutrition, between pharmaceutical treatment plus compensation for living space, between contemporary moment plus forthcoming. Your supplies have transformed. The accounting practices persist. Nevertheless, you exist warm currently. That constitutes something. That designates the component that maintains significance right now. The females in the chambers would have comprehended thermal comfort, would have appreciated this utilizing profundity that's challenging conceiving from your secure location. Toward them, thermal comfort didn't function as guaranteed. Thermal comfort demanded compensation via container. Thermal comfort represented an element completing alongside everything else. You contain this devoid of deliberating, obtain this devoid of monitoring. Slumber within this devoid of contemplating whether you could manage it. That characterizes the separation between their period plus yours. The opening that Campbell endeavored spanning, utilizing her meticulous interrogations plus her meticulous documentation. She aspired for individuals to comprehend, aspired toward the cozy for perceiving the uncomfortable. Plus currently you've perceived. Currently you comprehend Emmy plus her mollusks. The outfit exhibiting beautifully. The German female obtaining provisions designated toward strangers. The expiring feminine individual creating brilliant protecting covers designated toward juvenile individuals she'd encounter never. You comprehend the 12 cents daily, the 90 cents 7-day period, the destitution multiplication producing everything expenditure additional, the thermal beverage maintaining them continuing whenever they ought to have paused. The weight of understanding. You comprehend regarding the financial specialists plus their computations. The $900 per individual that functioned solely since averaging, a falsehood, a quantity that designated nothing toward anybody residing in its darkness. You comprehend plus comprehending represents the opening component, certainly not the ultimate component, certainly not the remedy, yet the inception regarding anything. Campbell comprehended that. That's the purpose she persisted knocking at entrances. The accounting practices would have appreciated that. The idea that her meticulous monitoring, her recording complete regarding quantities, could somehow traverse the numerous periods plus change the manner somebody contemplates. She sustained those documentation for herself regarding comprehending how compensation transferred, yet they transformed toward something additional. Documentation, testimony, a communicating existence from a ground-level chamber that continues addressing. She resided plus functioned plus expired plus the chambers refilled, containing somebody else's possessions, somebody else's battles. Nevertheless, something maintains lingering. Certainly not their anatomies, which transformed toward terrestrial material long previously. Certainly not their voices, which subsided prior your progenitors received existence. Yet the configuration of their existences, the layout of their persisting, the particular significance of their particular persisting, that comprises what accounts transmit. Certainly not the individuals themselves, yet something regarding them, a continuation and representation, a technique for comprehending what it suggested being individual in a particular location plus particular period. They'll diminish, possibly. By next rotation, you might not maintain recollection regarding the particular quantities, the 12 cents daily, the 90 cents every 7 days, the remaining following compensation plus nutrition plus anything else. Quantities merge collectively. Particulars recede. Nevertheless, something additional might persist. The experience regarding it, the heaviness of activities suppressed via circumstances they managed incapable of managing, the obstinate continuation of individuals that continued regardless, the diminutive temporary moments regarding consideration in the pulverizing. That's what accounts accomplish. They don't merely communicate, they designate you. Abandon following that demonstrates subsequently in unforeseen techniques, in how you observe a commodity designation, in how you contemplate employment, in how you comprehend the separation comprising what items demand plus what individuals obtain, the end and the beginning. The widow would have valued that. The idea that her meticulous monitoring, her documentation complete regarding quantities, could somehow traverse the numerous periods plus change the manner somebody contemplates. The widow remained, plus persisted, plus existed, plus created, plus perished, plus the chambers refilled containing somebody else's struggles. Your personal period, the previous period, has matured comprehensive. The accounts have gotten communicated. The quantities have gotten monitored. A single additional occasion within the comprehensive registration of the way we comprised plus the manner we continued. Let the significance of that settle inside you. Let the females discover their composure plus locate your personal. Subsequent portion the marketplace will exist intact, loaded with adversity plus diminutive consideration, loaded with the recurring interrogation regarding how we persist, how we endure, precisely how we maintain our humanity whenever the computations don't function. Nevertheless, that's subsequent. Currently, you're warm. Currently, you're protected. Currently, somebody communicated you a historic narrative plus you implemented attention completely via the duration. That's plenty. That comprises everything, actually. The period stays comprehensive. The communications have executed their functioning. Permit them departing currently. Permit absolutely everything depart. The computations plus the persistence. The difficulty plus the persisting. The communicating from the previous, deepening sluggish, deepening removed, disappearing toward the composure that continuously remained expecting below. Slumber appropriately. Rest soundly. The ladies will locate their repose, plus you'll locate your personal. Morning will happen. The globe will persist being here. Nevertheless, currently, in the darkness, in the profundity, permit the stories settle inside you. Permit them transform portion of your comprehension. Permit them stay as something you'll transport ahead. The widow, plus Emmy, plus the German female, plus each alternate female, whoever's communicating got misplaced. They mattered. Their accounts mattered. Their battle mattered. Their minuscule instant of consideration mattered, and they're currently yours to carry. The end of this story is not the end of their struggle. It continues an echo in the questions we must still ask, in the systems we must still challenge, in the humanity we must still protect. The neighbor below, she inhabits that 10-foot chamber independently, maintains it spotless, counts her resources, consumes less than she could, and appreciates that her family has departed. However, she isn't completely solitary. There's a female downstairs, juvenile woman specifically, who's unwell, cannot venture out anymore. That is how it always begins, not with catastrophe, not with drama, but with the body quietly refusing to cooperate one morning and never quite returning to its former state. The younger woman lives directly beneath her, in a ground-level room where the light enters differently, lower, dirtier, filtered through dust and the shadows of passing boots. She had once stitched shirts, then skirts, then children's garments. Her fingers were quick, her back still mostly straight. She had been strong enough once to work 14 hours and then cook something warm afterward. But sickness doesn't announce itself politely. It arrives disguised as fatigue, as pain you assume will fade, as weakness you believe you can outwork. She pushed through it longer than she should have. They always do, because stopping means hunger, and hunger is immediate, while illness feels abstract until it isn't. By the time she could no longer rise without dizziness, the work had already found someone else. The machine did not wait. The contractor did not inquire. The wages ceased. The rent, of course, did not. She now spends most days lying on her narrow bed, wrapped in a shawl that smells faintly of coal smoke and soap. Her breathing rattles sometimes, not constantly, just enough to make you listen for it. She is not dying today. Everyone understands this. But she is not improving either. And in a world where improvement is the only acceptable direction, stagnation is simply a slower form of decline. This is where the German woman enters the picture again, not as a hero, not as a savior, but as what people become when there is no institution to catch you. She brings bread, sometimes tea, occasionally a small pot of soup, stretched thinner than she would prefer, but still warm. She does not announce herself. She knocks softly, already knowing she will enter. There is no gratitude expressed in grand terms. There cannot be. Gratitude implies a debt, and debts are terrifying when you already have nothing. Instead, there is acknowledgment, a nod, a few words exchanged about the weather, about the noise in the hall, about a child upstairs who cries at night. Ordinary language, performing extraordinary work, allowing dignity to survive in a space where dignity has no economic value. The German woman does not linger long. She understands fatigue. She understands shame. She leaves the food within reach and returns upstairs, climbing carefully, one step at a time, conserving her breath. She will deduct the cost later in her notebook, adjusting something else to compensate. Perhaps less tea tomorrow. Perhaps thinner slices of bread. The arithmetic absorbs it. It always does. The younger woman, alone again, eats slowly. She has learned to eat slowly. Everyone has. Eating fast only reminds you how little there is. She saves part of the bread for later, though she does not know if later will come. She listens to the building, to the sounds of work continuing without her, to the footsteps above and beside and beyond. The city does not pause for illness. The city barely acknowledges it. At night, when the pain sharpens, she thinks about the future in pieces rather than as a whole. Not next year or 5 years, but tomorrow morning, the next meal, the next breath that does not hurt. Large futures are a luxury. Small futures are survivable. She remembers what it felt like to stand all day, to complain about sore feet, to be annoyed by the noise of the machines. Those complaints feel almost indulgent now. She would welcome the ache back if it meant movement, meant usefulness. Usefulness is the currency everyone understands. Without it, you become invisible frighteningly fast. The German woman understands this too. That is why she continues to come, not only with food, but with recognition, with proof that the younger woman has not yet slipped entirely out of the world of the living, that someone still knows she is there. Sometimes the younger woman apologizes for being a burden, for needing help. The German woman dismisses this gently but firmly. Burden is a word used by people who still believe they have options. Out loud, she says only this: you would do the same, and both of them know it is true. They are connected not by affection born of choice, but by proximity and circumstance, by shared understanding, by the quiet agreement that this is how one survives when survival is no longer an individual activity. You become part of someone else's calculation, and they become part of yours. The building itself seems to participate in this arrangement. The walls transmit sound too easily. The floors creak warnings. Privacy is impossible, but so is complete isolation. Suffering leaks through cracks the same way warmth does. No one is entirely unaware of anyone else. Children run through the hallways barefoot, even in cold weather. Their feet toughen quickly. They learn early what adults pretend not to know, that discomfort is not temporary here, that it is structural. They play anyway. They always play anyway. Life insists on itself in inconvenient ways. The German woman watches them sometimes from her doorway, expression unreadable. She has buried children. She has buried a husband. She does not attach easily now. Attachment is dangerous when loss is guaranteed. And yet she brings food downstairs. She patches clothing for neighbors when her fingers allow. She lends 5 cents knowing it may never return. This is not charity. Charity implies excess. This is redistribution among the already deprived, a reallocation of scarcity. It works only because everyone involved understands the fragility of the arrangement, because no one demands more than is offered, because no one pretends this is sustainable. Winter worsens everything. The stairwell becomes slick, the air grows sharper. Coal consumption increases, and so does anxiety. The German woman measures fuel the way others measure time. one scuttle left. 2 days, perhaps 3 if she does not boil water too often. She drinks tea weaker now, more water than leaf. It still helps. Habit matters as much as chemistry. Downstairs, the younger woman coughs more. Her fever comes and goes. On good days, she sits up and sews a little by hand. Mending, not production. There is no money in mending for oneself, but there is purpose. On bad days, she does not move at all. The German woman notices these shifts without comment. She adjusts accordingly. Soup on bad days, bread on good ones. There is no conversation about prognosis. Prognosis belongs to people who can afford doctors. Occasionally, someone suggests sending the younger woman to the hospital. Everyone knows what that means. Hospitals cost money. Hospitals mean debt. Hospitals mean dying among strangers instead of at home. The suggestion fades without argument. Time passes, not cleanly, not in chapters. It drags, stretches, compresses. One morning, the German woman does not hear coughing from below. She listens carefully. Silence can mean rest, or it can mean something else entirely. She waits. She counts to 100, then she descends. The younger woman is asleep, still breathing. Relief arrives quietly. There is no celebration, only the continuation of the routine. This is what endurance looks like when stripped of romance. No triumph, no resolution. Just the repeated decision to keep going one more day and to bring someone else along, if you can manage it. The tenement absorbs these stories without acknowledgement. Families move in. Families move out. Rooms refill. Names vanish. But the pattern persists. Poverty does not need memory to continue functioning. It only requires conditions. Above them, in parts of the city they will never see, people discuss averages and trends, growth and productivity. The numbers are clean, reassuring. They do not cough. They do not go hungry. They do not knock softly on doors carrying half a loaf of bread. Below, in the building, survival remains intimate, personal, measured in cups of tea and slices of rye. In who checks on whom? In who is still breathing this morning? The German woman returns to her room at night and writes in her notebook. Not because anyone will read it, but because recording reality is a way of asserting it exists. She lists expenses: bread, coal, soap, 16 cents spent downstairs. She pauses, pencil hovering. She adds nothing else. The page is full enough. She blows out the lamp early to save oil, lies down fully clothed, wraps herself in blankets that have grown thin with age. She is cold, but alive. She is hungry, but not alone. Downstairs, the younger woman dreams. Fragmented dreams, stitched together from memory and fever. In the dream, her hands move quickly again. The machine hums. The pain recedes. It is not a cruel dream. It does not taunt her. It simply remembers for her what her body has forgotten. Morning will come. It always does. And when it does, the calculations will resume. The bread will be divided. The tea will be brewed. The questions will remain unanswered. But for now, there is still breath, still warmth, however slight. Still the quiet resistance of people who refuse to disappear all at once. And that, in this building, counts as something.